Okay.
Why?
Give me 1 second. Okay, all right.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Roll call.
Mr. Smith?
Present. Oh, wait. Okay, good.
I'm here. Ms. Bays? Present. Dr. Park?
Here.
Ms. Epstein? Here. Ms. Gilliard? Not here.
Sure.
Ms. Markonian? Here. And I will watch for Ms. Gilliard. I don't know the time when she enters the
Please.
meeting.
Okay, great, thank you very much. Okay. Welcome, everybody. Welcome to our community member.
I think you might have to speak a little louder. I don't know if you can be
I don't know. Welcome to everybody who's in the audience. Thank you for coming to our first full board work session of the year. The topic today, as everybody knows, is to talk about our committee structure for next year. There's been, throughout the year, a lot of conversations and a lot of questions between board members about how we've been structuring our operations around our committees, what the role is of the committees, what the role is of particular committees, and just generally speaking, what is the latitude of committees to operate, what belongs in committees, what belongs in the entire board. So the goal today,
So I'm gonna make a motion to adopt that agenda. I think
Yes,
this is
sure,
out on the
we can do
agenda. I'll make a motion to adopt that agenda.
all in favor?
Oh, do we need a second? I'll
Second, all in favor? Okay, 6-0. Okay, so in any event, so the goal today is to set forth how we will operate at this point next year, vis-a-vis committees. There's been the most question, particularly around the curriculum committee, but I think we're going to focus on all three of the major standing committees, budget, policy, personnel, and curriculum. And really the goal today is to have Ms. Gilliard arrive at 9:05. So really the goal today is to have an open conversation with the trustees, we don't have to make it particularly formal, we can have a conversation with the input of Dr. Hines and the cabinet members, how we might operate moving forward next year, so we have less of the questions that we've had this year. I think that we should start generally talking about curriculum, because that's where, go ahead.
Can we all first agree what the role of the standing committee is? Because I don't know, I don't.
No, I think that's
know.
good. I think that's the
Before we
goal,
dive
yeah.
in, can we all agree what the purpose and the role is and the objective?
Sure. Do you want to
Okay.
start with what you are?
So, I
You
mean,
believe this?
so my understanding of a standing committee, which is what we're speaking about, is that they're gonna help prepare in a more in-depth way for either discussion items or items in alignment with board goals and superintendent goals and priorities, and bring recommendations to the board. They're doing that like nitty-gritty work that then is being brought to the board that they can discuss at a fuller level and then make a decision on so they can advance forward in whatever the work of the board is needed for that year. That's my impression of it, is that's what happens. So, I mean, if you want an example, I can give you an example. So an example would be, we'll do this, I'll use the budget committee just since I was the chair. So an example of this is that, it came to us that we wanted to look at energy performance contracts. We currently do have energy performance contracts. Are we using them in the most efficient and effective manner? The committee brought in speakers, the committee did analysis to the facilities department, and then the committee made a recommendation that yes, this was the direction we thought was worthwhile for the Board of Education to go forth and invest time, money, and resources to. And the board had a full board discussion about it in presentation. So that we executed work on an achievement that we were trying to accomplish to be more fiscally sound.
I just want to add, Julie's 100% correct. The standing committees, the purpose of standing committees is to make recommendations to the monthly board meetings. That's the purpose. So as Julie said, committees
do the legwork of the board, so that not all 7 people sit through something, 3 people sit through something, and then come back to a monthly board meeting with their recommendations. Whether it be a change in policy, whether it be a change in the budget, whatever it is, that's the
Changing curriculum.
that's a different conversation, so, yes, it would
So that's-
have to be an actionable item. For instance, if you wanna go back to now curriculum, and if you wanna jump right into curriculum, as far as curriculum is concerned, a job of the curriculum committee could have been, should have been,
We're
that
talking
they
about,
discuss
we're talking about next
the
year.
job of the curriculum committee this year could have been that they discussed the math programs, K through 8, and that they discuss whether or not those programs are working, the assessment that is taking place within those programs, the recommendations from the administration with regards to the changes in those programs, and then the curriculum committee would come back to the full board, so that the full board doesn't hear it, to give their update on the changes in a public board meeting. This is important, and that what the actionable items are. We need to invest $10,000 in a new program, and we're testing it, and this money is coming out of title funds. This money is coming out of the curriculum budget, whatever, the department. That's the type of information that our standing committees, if they're working properly, should be coming to the board with. I don't know that we've been doing all of that in our committees, and I think that is the reason we're here. I also just want to take it back a little bit. I think Dr. Hines, you had actually asked for this topic to be discussed amongst the board.
Correct.
So I would like to hear before we all start jumping into what your ideas and your suggestions and what.
Well, let's let, since 2 people gave their, let's
Okay.
finish.
Yeah, but I think it's
But I
important to
think-
hear from him.
I think so too, but I think it was important to hear from him before or after all the trustees. So let's let everybody speak and then we'll go that way. Yeah. So, anybody else want to contribute?
I'm gonna go, I'm okay with letting our administration jump in because they probably should have started before the trustees.
Okay, anybody else have something? Go ahead.
I don't know that I agree that the purpose of the standing committee has to be solely constrained and confined to making recommendations. I think sometimes there are opportunities to make presentations to the committee about where the district is and where the district wants to go on a particular focus or a particular subject. And whether that subject is within the committee structure and broadly disseminated to the community that way, or at a board meeting, sometimes I think it's a time issue.
So can I just ask you a question? Because I understand that perspective as well. So the question I then have is, and I think it's very important that there are conversations had about items that are taking place or topics that are taking place in the school district that have nothing to do with actionable things. An update, committee, something that is going on curricular, okay, for instance. But my question is, if it's done at the committee level, then when do I, as a board member, have the opportunity to ask my questions? Because the way we've structured, so this is a good example that you're bringing up, because the way we've structured our committees is that we don't have, only 3 people really have the opportunity or the ones who are responsible. I can come as a community member, but if this is something that is board work, because the board is discussing it, then when does this board member who's not on that committee get their opportunity? So those are the things I understand we should think about. You make a very valid point, I don't disagree, I think there is opportunity, which is why I believe that when we have updates, curriculum update, for instance, I believe it should be at the full board level, so that all board members have the opportunity to hear, the entire community has the opportunity to hear, and has the opportunity to ask their questions. But again, we're not disagreeing on this, I just think we have to think about the other
Why
aspects of it.
is that unique to curriculum? Or why isn't it, the same argument can be made for almost any topic
Correct.
discussed, in any committee,
Correct,
right?
correct.
So,
Correct, but the only place that we've really done updates, just in our past practice, and not really had actionable items as far as committee level work has been done, has been curriculum.
We've had policy
Not really.
updates almost every month.
I mean, policy updates
No,
on
I said the
personnel.
only place we haven't had actionable items come out is in curriculum. For instance, at policy, we do discuss policies, we make changes to policies. At budget, we do discuss the budget and bring the recommendations back budget-wise. I'm talking about what Deborah brought up as an example, that's really more a curricular type of a discussion where it would be an update type of situation.
I think Nana's right.
No,
I
I'm
mean,
saying that we've had updates in other committees. that
Personnel
have
has like staffing,
required-
hiring updates.
Personnel updates, we have the application of policies, we've had updates on,
we've
so
got
we have
updates
updates in
and
other
similar
committees as
updates.
well. That's my-
Correct, but we should be doing they should be actions is what I understand. I mean, we've always done personnel updates, perhaps they should be in board meetings.
And
So
policy updates.
So maybe the question really should be, why do we have committees? I mean, are we,
That's where I feel like you feel like this is going.
I don't know. I mean, maybe we should, why aren't we giving personnel updates at full board meetings? Like, why is it just 3 people privy to some information? Again,
It's not,
because we don't,
don't we all have access to either being there or
Yes.
watching it?
yes,
I
but
think
not as a board.
Well, but the board is delegating the committee members to go off and
Correct.
explore these
Yes,
topics
yes,
on
again,
behalf of
this is
the board.
all, this is
Right.
all theoretical discussion.
Right, 100%. I think Julie's been very politely trying to speak.
Yes.
No, I'm just gonna say, look, there's some redundancies in doing it, right? So I'm also agreeing with what Deb said, which is also why, and I'll use the budget committee again, and the energy reforms contract, right? We had a redundancy. We had a presentation that we made at the committee, and we realized that that presentation really needed to come to the full board and be made by the presenters at the full board. So we kind of wasted the time of some people in order, right? So this kind of goes to this point. What is the purpose and what is the role? There are certain things that should be presented to the full board so that they can have their opportunity to ask the experts and ask the questions that they need to ask so that we're most effective and efficient with our time, right? And the time of our administration as well. And that was a hindsight call. We didn't realize it was gonna be so thorough and that we would want to, but we made the decision to then make that a full board discussion and bring it to that point. And so I'm just saying is that there are certain things in other committees that are discussed the same way, but then are not brought to the full board and allowing the full board to then, to Emily's point, right, ask the questions and maybe action comes out of those questions and comes out of those discussions to direct and, guide the administration on the path. Because that's ultimately what the partnership is in this
And I think it's a really good point about the energy performance contract, because keep in mind, the evening meetings there's a lot going on, there's a lot of people in attendance, it's late at night.
There are a lot of people in
Well,
attendance, more than today.
More than that, there's.
It's usually just got one more
Right,
person.
There's administrators who have to, get back late and wake up early to feed their chickens and, it's just so I think it was like, there's a lot of value in pre-screening something like that in the daytime here when there's, less pressure. And then you determine that, hey, this is something that looks like it has color, let's bring it to the board meeting. So I think that is like the perfect example of the committee functioning properly. So I don't necessarily see.
Yeah, giving us a ding on that
Yeah.
one, so.
Say that? What was that?
I'm
So-
giving a
so,
ding on it.
Right, I know, so I don't think that the redundancy is necessarily a problem, because it was much more efficient, and a lot of people already knew what to ask at the evening meeting, and we were able to go virtual.
Yeah, I agree with that. I agree with your point. I just would count it the other way as well, because I think that the question really that we're pushing back to is, should we have committees at all, right? And not every board has committees, but if you want to have the depth of conversation that we have at our committees, and you push it to one evening meeting a month, we're going to be there till midnight. And I don't think anybody does their best work when they just want to go home, right? So that's why we traditionally have the committee structure. I think our energy performance
I
contract.
think other boards, by
conversation-
the way, do that work and don't say that it's only night. I mean, I think you can get it done.
I was speaking to a person who said that their monthly meeting is 6 hours because they do all 3 committees every day.
Look, we also know there are differences in how every board functions, right? So I happen to think that that conversation was more efficient because there were 3 of us who we had done the very, very deep dive, we supported it.
if we all trust each other as board members, which I think we do, and hopefully do going forward, that counts for something for the rest of the board. If they feel like the people on that committee have already looked very deeply at an issue and support something, that energy performance conversation was much faster than I think it would have been at night otherwise, if everybody was trying to wrap their minds around it at once. So I think I agree with a lot of what's been said. I don't actually think committee meetings have to be entirely action items all the time. And I see your point, Emily, but every board member can always raise any issue in the evening meeting. So if there's something big, it should be happening in a committee update, and there should be a moment that another board member can weigh in, but if that doesn't happen, anybody can always weigh in.
I want to hear what the administrators' recommendations are, if we're ready for that.
I think everyone's had a chance to speak, so let's do it. Dr. Hines?
First of all, good morning. So first and foremost, the committee structure that we have, I think, actually, I know different work takes place in different committees and the type of work. And I just want to go back to Julie's question only because that's what I was going to start with, and it was more of an inquiry, is what is the purpose of the board committee and what type of work should take place? And I agree, I think there's a balance of presentations and doing work. I'm going back to my previous life in my other district as an example. And the one I was really most part of was the curriculum committee. But I'm not saying this is what we should do, this is what I'm familiar with. They chose at the beginning of the year 3 items to take a deep dive on, to explore, to research, and then to make a recommendation. For example, the district at the time was leaning toward the possibility of moving toward an IB program. Looking at it at all 3 levels, elementary, middle, and high school. Clearly, you can't just meet for an hour and a half and go, there's our recommendation, right? So they would take 3, maybe 4 meetings. Every committee member had a role and responsibility in conducting the research. At times, they would be offline to meet and then come back together, discuss it some more, and then make a formal recommendation to my board. I love that because a lot of the legwork was done, and then we, as a cabinet, can determine whether this is a direction we should go.
Can I ask you a clarifying question? You said they chose the topics. Who's the they?
The committee.
The committee.
The committee,
Board members?
it was board member, it was actually a board member, it was singular. And then there were teachers, and there were, of course, administrators. So it was a lot more inclusive of impact as far as what that would look. I like that structure because everybody had a voice when they're making that recommendation. Again, I'm not saying that's what should happen, that's what I was familiar with. When I came here, it was the land of presentations, and I think you would all agree, it doesn't matter who was assistant super at the time, whether it was Wafa, whether it was Dave, and who was leading it as a board member. But it was presentation after presentation, most notably the same presentations every single year, right? I think we're gonna have our 4th one about core extension problem. And at some point, I think we need to really reflect and say, all right, so going back to Julie's question, what is the purpose not only of the committee, but of each individual within the respective committee as far as what work they should do? To Nad's credit and to Sean's credit, I think many of the presentations, I would say almost all of the presentations this year, I think were worthy of the whole public to see. That's what I'm saying. I'm saying the whole public because they were all the data discussions regarding graduation rates, AP, region scores, 3 through 8 testing. That I think is important for everyone.
Right.
So I think at some point we need to draw a line in the sand potentially and say, all right, what should the whole board and public hear presentation wise? And what should be just the legwork of what the committee? Because you may have your own presentations if you're doing a deep dive. And that's why I wanted to have this conversation. And again, I think policy is structured in a way where, everybody has a voice, everybody's doing some work, and then you relate to the board and they either adopt it or they don't. And the same thing for the budget committee. I think it's natural in the way that it lends itself to have presentations and to have the board hear the work that's going on. So for me, especially where we are as a school district, this work for curriculum instruction, and it is assessment, by the way, because we have to start having assessment conversations very soon. I think if we structure in a way that I'm familiar with, I think we would have a lot more productive work. Not that the work is not productive, just in a different way. So I just wanted to share.
Produce outcomes and assessments.
Yes, and the possibility to explore things that we haven't before with multiple voices in the room, which I think is important.
My name is Rachel.
Dr. Feeney, did you want to add anything or talk first?
I'm curious how it works in your past life.
So one of the things that is a little different here is the role that the PGCD plays with curriculum issues, and that's a little unique. Not every district has a committee with this sort of history and the impact that produces, as Dr. Hines said, a lot of the buy-in that we can get, and can it be a little slow at times? It can be, but it also produces the kind of collaboration and buy-in that leads to a level of sustainability that we'd all like to have. So the notion that we would then have a board committee, because in my previous ones we had a curriculum committee made up of parents, board members, administrators, teachers, and even students to review topics and pose questions and help guide where the direction might be. I gave presentations as a principal to that committee regarding our AP program, whether or not, how open we would be as we were bringing gates down, and then what the results of that would be. Those were issues and initiatives at the school level, but they had a district-wide impact, and that was a way of informing what was going on, and then say, hey, have you tried this, so on and so forth. So, that's what's a little different about Portland. And, I do agree with Dr. Hines. I think some of the presentations, certainly the ones he mentioned, I also had on the college admissions one, and the graduation rates that was just done, that's something that belongs to the whole community. And I think in those presentations, we're not just presenting data, but we're also presenting action plans. That's always an important part, and that's where some of the discussion points come to play. And there's a level of accountability when you do that, and I do think that should be put forth to the whole community, so the full board and other community members, whoever's present, is a greater formality, I think, in a board meeting that takes place in the evening, for example. I don't think it can be done at a board meeting, because that's a lot. We've had, as people joke about, we've had lengthy discussions in the curriculum committee meeting. But is it worth scheduling sometimes for some of those presentations at a different point? It might be. But PGCD plays such a crucial role to curriculum development and the discussion and a lot of the work that might be done at a budgetary level, where you break it up and you look in and you do research about this. That's what gets done with PGCD. We have subcommittees of the subcommittees, and people go off and get information. And as we're doing a curricular review for mathematics that's gone on since started last year, complete with full surveys of everyone using our math program, outreach to upwards of 24 publishers, and fine tuning that down, group discussions, small group discussions, presentations over the course of 3 days. It's not a lot of the heavy lifting, to the point where they'll give a recommendation for a math program. And I've been providing stuff that work along the way. And, that's how the curriculum gets changed here, or adopted.
So, given the reality of the institutionalization in this district, I'm going to rip off the Band-Aid. What realistic role can a board member play in a curriculum committee workshop or brainstorm, or whatever you want to call it, I'm gonna move away from committee because it sounds more like a workshop. What realistic role, viable role, not just potty plant role, or being said, we're the experts, we know what we're talking about, and if a board member has a different opinion, there's no room for it. And I've been in that position, and so I love the idea, I do, where board members can be involved in work, and boards can be involved in helping make curricular decisions, not how you do something, but maybe what you do as an overall philosophy, all for it. But realistically speaking, in this district, is there a place for that? And maybe you don't want to answer right now, or you can't answer now.
But he's interested. She has some.
I know, but I just want to add something. I think we all are nodding our heads because we all thought the same thing when we heard the way it worked with Dr. Hines' example. And we were all shaking, saying, yeah, but what about PGCD? And they do play kind of the role that you were suggesting took place in your other school district, except that in your other school district, there were parents and there were board members. So I guess there's a two-pronged question. Would PGCD ever consider adding that aspect? I think I know the answer. But I think the second part, I guess, to take it to the next step, I think the natural then would be, we have PGCD, they make their curricular assessment changes, analysis, the way that they operate. And then those recommendations, or that should be then a presentation to the entire Board of Education in a public setting at a board meeting that says, and that PGCD has looked at our math program. We've found some issues with our math program. We are now going through the process of doing 2 pilots. These 2 pilots are going to be tested. We're then going to do this. Board of Education, what are your questions? We come in after PGCD because we have it set up that way in our district. And I believe it's per contract. We've set it up that way so that this is the way that we operate. I think that's the natural progression which you're talking about, because you're right. We don't have rules in that process the way we set it up in our school district. But we do have room if it's presented to us in a board meeting, an update of, and I'm using this as an actual example, right? What has been taking place and how we then get involved. We may then have questions about, well, what are these programs? Can you give us a little bit more information? How much are they costing? Is it a cheaper process? What happened to our past program? Why did it fall apart? All these questions could be asked and should be asked by board members in a Board of Education, and I keep saying public meeting.
Then there's no committee.
Correct. That's what
So-
I'm saying.
I'm not agreeing with you, I'm just
I-
understanding that's what you're
So-
saying.
Yes.
I'm confused because curriculum committee, policy committee, budget committee are all public meetings, number one, and it keeps being described as not public.
I'm not talking about the committee not being public, I'm talking about this particular topic. I'm giving it as an example of this topic. I'm not talking about, I know the committee is public. I'm just talking about this topic.
But even discussing that the public should be provided access at an evening meeting about X topic. The public has access to our evening meetings and the public has access to our committee meetings. So I think that just needs to be made clear. I don't know why we keep muddying that. But the other, what's the problem? Another way to do it is really what I'm meaning. That PGCD presentation could go to the curriculum committee, and then that committee could make recommendations to the board as well.
Yes, 100%, except that the word recommendations has to be included in that, right?
Yeah,
It
but
can't be-
did I?
No, I
I
understand
did
that.
say it.
Yes.
I'm just checking because I thought I did.
No, but it should be that at the actual board meeting, the curriculum committee says, we discussed the math program, here's what's happened. As opposed to, we had a discussion on the math program, please go watch the meeting.
Well, on the contrary, our policy as of late has been that we assume that trustees have watched the
Correct,
entries
I don't,
because we're not we're not giving updates on what happened at the meeting, we're only bringing recommendations.
Actionable items,
Right.
right.
So to the extent that PGCD has an hour update to give on a topic, for example, and we wanted the board to hear that, I think a curriculum committee daytime meeting is in a lot of ways preferable. Number one, I assume that the PGCD members will prefer to give that in the day, maybe I'm totally wrong, but they don't want to say.
Well, they
that.
actually work during the day.
Yeah, we come by Mr. Classes.
I mean, now you have to get covered,
That's true.
but oh, we have.
But I don't know if they want to, I don't know if you can get, I don't know if individuals want to come in.
No, they work.
Don't we all?
No, no.
So, in any case, we just have to, I think about that, how we've structured it in the past. I know these two have been waiting for a long time.
So a couple things, just to drill down, like the public accessibility issue, I'm hearing all of us say we want to listen to be accessible to the public, but I think that broad sweep doesn't necessarily bring us to where we need to be. Personally, I think the committee meetings are more accessible to the public. They're easier for people to watch and follow the conversation because the way we're filmed here versus at night. A member of the public can sit here and ask their questions, or if they're not here, they can always email us later on. So if we were to change to having presentations at evening meetings, I think that we just have to be clear on the implications of that, right? I don't think that necessarily makes it more accessible to more of the public. We also have dramatically changed the input that the public can have because of the way our evening meetings are structured. Because here, a member of the public can have live interaction with committee members. So if we were going to move to having these kind of discussions at night, I want us to change the structure of our board meetings so that when we're discussing substantive issues, we allow members of the public to comment and for us to respond and integrate those comments into the conversation we're having. This second piece is, I'm hearing a lot of support for increasing the role in the board in curricular decisions, and I'm 100% on board for that. The issue is how it happens, and I think a big piece is PGCD here, which complicates things, so I just want to add some more detail to our conversation on that too. It is a contractual obligation. I don't have the contract in front of me, but the contractual obligation is to have a committee that has shared decision-making and plays an advisory role to the superintendent.
I don't think it's a shared decision making. I think it's just advisory.
It's advisory.
Yeah.
It's advisory,
Right.
but the wording in it implies a collaboration.
Right.
But in the contract, what is required is that they are allowed to have this, I think it's described as shared, but you're right, it's advisory, let's use the word advisory, where they make a recommendation to the superintendent then has a certain amount of time to consider the recommendation and has to provide information back if he or she decides not to go with the recommendation, and there's a communication back and forth, but it's advisory. So me personally, I think that it's always been a little bit of a disconnect between PGCD and the board curriculum committee. We've had moments where that creates a chicken and egg situation like it did with the homework policy, where obviously you want input from the teachers, you don't want to write a homework policy in a vacuum, but the board wanted input too, and so who talks first and how do you collaborate and who doesn't step on whose toes? So perhaps what we want is a structure where, Dr. Feeney is in the PGCD meetings. Maybe there is an official setup of a liaison or the expectation that there's liaison between these two things. And at regular curriculum meetings, there are updates on where PGCD is on various issues and the dates that certain recommendations are coming, so that that collaboration can extend to the board as well. In an easier way. And then the last thing I would add is I think it's important to note, we have in my 6 years on the board had presentations that I think we would all say were dog and pony shows, just sort of filling the time of the curriculum committee. I don't think every time we have a presentation though, it goes in that same category. And I think we've had a lot of presentations this year and we had many last year, that were real deep dives into subjects that the board and the public needed to understand. And that educating of the board and the public and getting on the same page between the administration and the board and the public is valuable in and of itself, because then all of those parties and all the stakeholders have the same information to start working on a problem. Because I think we're all sitting here knowing that there are things we want to improve in this district. And if all the stakeholders have all the information and understand where we are, that's better,
So,
right?
I'm sorry, I have to jump in. Rachel made a statement, and I agree with you, except that last year, I believe last year, we at one point had committees as actual work sessions of the board, where all 7 board members had the opportunity to talk at the committee level and make decisions. And I don't disagree with you that, yeah, my point is this, and I'm keeping this up, and I think that's the point that has been made. When do we get the opportunity, when the entire board gets the opportunity to ask their questions? And is it something that we as a board want to make a decision on? So I don't want us to be having, in my opinion, conversations for the sake of having conversations. We should be having conversations with some sort of outcome, right? And
Right.
sometimes it takes a while,
But like,
Julie's been
we're,
waiting.
I know, we're a
Guys,
school district, like, education is important, right? For
I'm not
board members,
disagreeing
I think
with
there are
you.
moments
Everybody
where, for board members and the community give educated input on how they feel
100%.
about the education, they should be educated.
100%, all board members. I'm not disagreeing with you.
But every board member can always watch.
But you're not allowed to ask your questions. We
are.
We need specific thing, but I'm asking as a community member. I sit behind there and I ask as a community member. But I don't ask when I speak though, as a board member.
Right.
So you understand, we should make them work sessions of the board. And then whoever wants to come.
Why don't we make all of the committees work sessions?
I don't disagree with you on this. I'm
Okay,
telling
well,
you.
I think that's a waste
Hold on,
of our
guys, let's-
board's time to
Julie,
do that, that's my problem.
Okay, so I don't know if I'm behind on this conversation, but I feel like we wanted to address committees as a whole, and we have found ourselves circling a curricular committee
It
discussion.
seems to be the most controversial.
And I understand that, but again, remember, if we as a board are functioning well, then whatever format we will create for our committee structure will work for all. So I'm gonna take it back for just a second. I wanna just us all to reflect on what our role and how we govern and what the job of a Board of Education is. So the job of a Board of Education is really not the evaluation of the superintendent, those components. I'm talking only from the global picture. We're the forward thinkers. We're the big people. We're helping with the board goals and projecting out 5 years, 10 years, marrying that along with our budget, right? And we do that all through governance. So again, this may be semantics, but maybe what we need to do is we need to start acting in that manner. So pigeonholing our committees with these specific topics of budget, curricular, policy is different because we do have an obligation to govern by policy. So I'm just keeping that out because
And we have an obligation for the budget.
we do also,
Yes,
but
I have an obligation for
we have an obligation
curriculum.
and
Well,
curricular, but different obligations, but again, but maybe what happens is that, right, so we govern by policy. So why don't you have a governance committee or a committee on board operations? Because that's what policy is, right? And then you can also incorporate into it, how should our board be operating? And when we have instances like that, those 3 board members or community members or liaison or however it's structured for them, they are discussing policy and how it applies to the governance and the operation of the board. If there's a question about how our committees were run, that would be brought to that governance committee first to kind of noodle it out and then come to the full board with it. The second would be a planning and development committee, which would be responsible for the planning decisions and products. So this is where we're now aligning our board goals, our vision, our mission, our portrait of a graduate to the long-term efficacy and effectiveness of what we want to accomplish while weaving in budgetary forecasting into it, right? Planning, forecasting, that's what you're looking for. And then lastly, that accountability part that we ever so much are missing, which is performance oversight, where we now start to say, Are we having an academic return on our investment? Are we performing the standards that we need to perform? And how are we holding ourselves accountable? And that's where those metrics and measures are coming into play. And you're really now functioning as a governing operation that has planning, governing by policy and operations, and then holding yourselves accountable. Because Dr. Hines had said this as well, we don't hold ourselves accountable. We're not assessing anything, right? And this would also, in that structure, would give us, especially under planning and development, if you wanted to take curricular issues, for example, because they've been the topic du jour. The issue that we've had with curricular issues is this year and in years past, we discuss a different curricular issue every month. There is no way you can have planning and development when you discuss a curricular issue a month. Or even the same is true, performance contracts, when we discuss the energy performance contracts. We took 2 to 3 meetings to discuss energy performance contracts. That's how, and the same is true with policy. You took 2 to 3 meetings, sometimes even 5 meetings to discuss policies. I think that's how we need to be looking at it, is that we can't bite off this huge initiative whereby we're saying we're gonna tackle 700 things in 1 year. We need to take our board goals and our priorities are this, and our long-term priorities are that. Use those to set the agendas and the foundations for our committee organization. Pick those 3 topics a year and really do those deep dives and hold ourselves accountable. And make sure our policies are in line with that, right? Make sure our budget's in line with that, and make sure our curricular and other initiatives are in line. Does that make sense what I just said?
I mean, personally, I agree with the latter half. I think you can use that with, I don't necessarily think that you need to rename or restructure all the committees, but generally, as I agree with you, because I've seen it over my last 2 years here, that there are too many topics, and it really is, even if you think about it in any part of life, you can't have one meeting on one thing, and then move on to the next thing and not address it again in a year. So it does take 3, 4, 5 meetings to really dig into something, especially when it's an hour meeting and you have 2 minutes.
Well,
First question.
to be fair on
Yeah.
that, we had a big turnover in the board, and there were conversations around the efficacy of the curriculum committee, but we've also had turnover in administration.
100%.
So we really needed, in my estimation, we needed this year to allow Dr. Feeney to really dig into curriculum, instruction, and assessment across the entire district. So we knew as a committee that this needed to be looked at, but we needed time. And this is the time, I think this is the perfect time.
I know guys have been jumping here, so.
Well, I can,
Yeah, no, go ahead, Anna.
I think in terms of the current committees as they are, I believe policy has a rhythm. If there are certain goals that we have, we can choose the policies that further those goals or should be added to further those goals. They need to be revised to further those goals. And so there's a rhythm there, and there can be an agenda set out for the year regarding those policies, and then making room for some policies that may come up in the interim, or policies by law that have to be revised. There's flexibility there, but I think as a committee, policy works well in that structure. Having been chair of that committee, I can see it happening that way. I think that budget has a rhythm, except when the state doesn't vote on a budget until the end of April, but budget has a rhythm. There's certain things that budget, and also facilities, it's on a schedule, and some of it is, much of it is fixed by law, and so unless that changes, there's a natural rhythm and a template, if you will, that they can be followed. And I think the thing about curriculum is that even though learning is constant, there are things about curriculum that are organic and that will naturally change, or they need to change because a math program isn't working, or changing the honors program at the high school, or what do we want to do for our elementary kids, or social emotional learning, you get my understanding. And I think that's where curriculum becomes harder to spread out over lots of different committees with over the 3 committees in terms of the planning, the strategy, and the assessment, because there's more evolution, I think, within the curriculum committee, more change. And I think that if we can keep that committee as tight as possible and allow specific subjects to evolve the way they need to, I think it can function. I still go back to the question of, if the board is, I do believe that one of the responsibilities of the board is to oversee curriculum, not to dictate specific learning tools, but to oversee the philosophy. And the
It's not a
question,
duty, it's an obligation.
it's an obligation.
I don't know that we all agree on that.
And communities,
That's-
communities, communities,
literally-
It's in
Yes,
this outline.
it is in this was outlined, and communities vote on board members many times because of an educational philosophy and what they want their district to look like. And that can go both ways, but we've seen it all across Long Island. I don't have to go, nationwide to tell you what's happening. So, but I go back to my concern is given that the board has this responsibility and obligation and power, will it work? Like, we want it to work, right? But we
We vote on every
need
textbook.
all cylinders going and all the wheels turning in our direction. We need the North Star to be aligned with us as well. And so that, I just go back to that. However we decide to do curriculum, I think that that's a really important thing that we all need to be aware of. That's my kind of experience, that's my concern.
So, not to put you on the spot, Dr. Payne, but,
But
as the person in this
Really meant that.
department, right, I did mean it, as the person leading this department in this charge, and given the parameters of how we operate with PGCD, how do you see this committee being its most effective?
I'm gonna actually go back to something that Skiller touched upon a little bit in this, in some ways we do have, listen, I'm co-chair of the PGCD committee. The conversations, presentations, and discussions we've had through the work of our curriculum committee has helped to inform me of direction, inclinations, community members, board members, and that's important. That can then help to guide some of the discussions that take place at PGCD. And even when looking at the mathematics curriculum, it's not as if the teachers are operating in, this untouchable land. They're well aware that there are budgetary issues, and they look, what's the guidance on the budgetary issues? What can we do? They understand, what's acceptable. Do we have to have a program this way, that way? So they're looking for guidelines as well, and they're operating within those guidelines. So, I think the committee is pretty clear. PGCD makes recommendations, not to the board, makes recommendations to the superintendent of schools. And even as co-chair, they bring it to me, I sign off as a co-chair, and then we forward our recommendations to the superintendent of schools. And ultimately can choose to accept or decline it. Clearly, he's going to make sure he has all the information, the superintendent, to make an informed decision whether he accepts it. So that doesn't happen in a vacuum, right? That happens in the course of here's what's going on, here's what's happening, updating the superintendent on the work of PGCD, providing some of that information along the way. Whether or not there can be more updates towards the board. I think PGCD, their job is not to inform the board. Probably it is our job. Their work is not, a state secret. Once they make a recommendation, the process is put on for all of the teachers and administrators in the district to see. So, they're not trying to hide anything. And that's really important. I don't want to give the impression that PGC is out there hiding and they've got their own little agenda, not at all. I've been really impressed. I've spent hours with the mathematics even though I'm not part of that. I spend time with them, and I've really been impressed with the presentations and the discussion that's taken place. We had a new SIS student got adopted this year. That was done in an accelerated path through PGCD. It's done the right way. And here we are, well on the way. So one can get work done. It's got to be a collaboration, and if one respects that, you can move forward on curriculum. And I think the board's role would be, in my role, whoever's in this position, is to serve as that liaison and inform the board of what's going on, which I did in your packet this week.
Can I piggyback off something? So I think, again, we as a board, at least my time being on the board, have never discussed the two options you have. And I'm gonna now specifically speak about curriculum, right? So there are two ways curricular-wise the board can be informed. The board can be a part of the process along every step of the way, right? Being informed throughout. Or the board can be informed at the end of the process, and it can be presented to them, and they would have their time to ask the questions. I think in order for us to identify our curricular needs, we need to answer which of those two ways is the board going to operate. And if that's the way that we're operating, then that should be, again, towards our governing policies, so that it won't be of confusion for later. Hence my how policy and governing and curriculum and all those things marry together.
I got two things to say. First, I think we are continuously making a distinction without a difference of like board members being a curriculum or not. All board members can come to the curriculum committee if they want to. There's plenty of time to ask questions, so I don't think that's a fundamental problem. And then the second thing is like we're now at 9:55 and I am not seeing any like particular action plan or anything for that requires a board vote. So I'm wondering if there is a recommendation that the board needs to vote on.
Well, I think we're trying to get everyone's, this is something that's been kind of brewing for at least I'm guessing more than 2 years that we've been around. And we kind of need to, I think, air out where everyone's head is so that we can be collectively, I don't know that it's a vote necessarily, I don't think this meeting ends with a vote. This is gonna end with a sort of agreeing on a plan of action that we're
Well,
gonna
that would be a vote.
next, I don't know that it's a
Plan of
vote.
action.
Well, I don't know, we're not gonna make a resolution.
No, it's so we can have the
This
conversation.
is awesome. We're gonna leave this
now, so
meeting
we
with
restructure
agreement
for
on the
next
record. We're gonna leave this meeting with agreement on the record of how we're gonna function. So that we don't have to keep having
Okay.
conversations.
So in that vein, I'm not seeing agreement on a plan, on any kind of agreement on a plan of action. So I think it will have to be some kind of vote because I think there are very different visions for what this is. And one of the visions is essentially stay the course. And another vision is that we shake up the committee structure.
We'll get a sense at the end of where everybody stands on that, I think. But I know that we're gonna resolve something because of the protocol.
I think we should try, and that's the whole point of the work session, we should get the work done.
Yeah, it's
I don't think we should
but I don't know that
walk
we're gonna make a resolution necessarily.
An action plan is what I was asking, and I agree with them, we should have some sort of action.
Of course.
I just want to make a clarification. If memory serves me correctly, the reason we called it a work session was because I think we were discussing homework where we had an intersectionality of policy and curriculum. We had policy and curriculum together to discuss homework and also to discuss, there was another one, I can't remember, there was another topic. And that's why when two committees came together, we realized
We used to have also all committees be work sessions, where all board members were able to be at the meeting. It might have been
For-
during
for 1
COVID, it
year,
was
we
during
did
the whole
it.
COVID world, so if you remember, right? It was
Yeah,
COVID.
for 1 year.
But I think do we have at least consensus about the way that we, well, I guess first, well, I don't even say every meeting, but I was thinking
Please.
responding to Adam's
That's all.
comment. Do we want to get a sense as to whether we like the fact that we have policy and personnel, budget and facilities and curriculum
Can I
first,
go a step further with that? I think,
or a different structure?
I think maybe a step further is I think what I've heard throughout this discussion is that I've heard various board members say that budget is set up to work with an action plan, policy set up to work with an action plan. The one I think that is being questioned most by all of us is curriculum. So I think the question should be targeted a little bit more to how do we all feel or get a sense of do we want to make changes? Because if everybody thinks curriculum should continue.
Well, that's a two-part question, right?
Right, I think that's the
The
real
first,
question.
the first
why
question,
curriculum?
the first question is, does everybody agree that budget? First of all, we should get a sense of who's happy with the status quo and who wants to make a change. So let's start with who's,
Defining
status
status
quo.
quo.
As it exists today.
the status quo is the
How
general,
about three committees?
the general
Maybe
structure,
the
three committees
as opposed
that we
to
have
the
today.
restructuring that-
Let's start with the three committees we have today.
We want
Who
the
thinks we
three
should keep
committees.
those three committees?
I would
as they
like
are?
See, I don't think that's
Yeah.
the right question.
I'm gonna ask multiple questions.
Yeah.
Just wait 1 second. Let me ask the question. Generally speaking, so Rachel, I see you did not raise your hand.
I actually just, I happen to think the committees are useful. I think the first question really is like, do we want the committee structure versus pushing stuff back into the night meetings? I think we should keep the committee structure. I actually don't feel like I have enough information from Julie's proposal to project it. So that's why I'm not raising my hand. Not because I don't support the committee structure, but because I think she raised this possible alternative, and I think it's just a little early to say, no, we really don't like that alternative.
Okay, so what would get you to the point that it's not too early? With the goal of finishing today?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So
That decision.
I guess from,
Well, but
Always
apparently,
continue it. I mean,
well,
You could have an ad hoc committee on our committee structure.
I think
Pretty
let's-
people could
let's try to-
look at
let's try to
it.
avoid that.
no, Emily would like every board member to have input. So,
No, I only would like every board member to be fully updated in a public board meeting
I don't,
with actionable items. Not only
but so we could do that,
I think
right?
the
But
issue
we
is
haven't
that, look, I think the issue
we've
is,
done it from
I think what, I
budget
think what,
policy,
I think
yes.
what Emily is saying, like, for example, and I've said it every meeting, right? I will ask questions at every meeting, and some of the questions I've asked at those meetings, I've asked for those questions to be brought to the public meeting. Then they're not brought to the public meeting, and so much time has lapsed.
when you say they're
It's-
not brought to the public
yeah,
meeting, what do you mean by what? I'm
So
just-
the
actual
chair,
By- by-
the chair of the committee did not bring those questions to the public meeting for a discussion.
The full board meeting.
To the full board
So
meeting.
you're
Not the
saying,
full
I'm
board
just trying to
meeting.
understand, when you say you've asked, like, you asked at.
So I was at
a committee.
I was at a committee meeting, and I would say, I'm asking, can we have this as a full discussion at a board meeting? I'm asking, can we talk about these 5 questions when this is brought up at a board meeting? So that has never been carried forth. So that's what I think the issue really is that if there's, again, remember, if you have one conversation about something, and then at a evening board meeting, you just say, we had this conversation, we had this presentation, then it dies. So, right, nothing else happens, no one's taking any, nobody's saying, we're putting this initiative forth to you, or we had these questions that came up and we're gonna go back to the committee and redevelop or reexamine them. It's just it's like a shut door in that
Right,
regard, and
right,
so
right.
I guess that's part of the structure also, if questions are brought up, so I try, I don't always do it, but I know as a facilitator, I'm speaking about myself, in budget, if questions are raised, if I try to incorporate them either into the recommendation or into the presentation that is made at the evening board meeting. Again, budget is a little more formulaic, so it's easier said than done, right? It's easier said, right, and can be done. So that, I don't know if it's such a good, but I would assume that would be the responsibility of the chair of the committee, that when certain questions, or if it's asked by a board member in the committee, can this be discussed at a full public meeting? Who's responsible for taking that action forward?
Which is why I think it goes.
That's what I
back
think
to
you're
what
trying to
Dr.
say.
Hyde said, is that, and again, we're talking about curriculum now, let's just, I think the question becomes,
I'm trying to
is
just
it
talk in general.
only, yeah, but it's really, it's all mostly curricular stuff. So the question I think becomes, should we not maybe choose 2 or 3 topics at the beginning of the year that do align with our board goals and our superintendent goals and our strategic plan, and continue to discuss those topics throughout the year with the goal of coming with a recommendation. Now, what has been added to this is that we have a standing, a committee, PGCD, that does some of that. So perhaps it is at the curriculum committee that the 2 topics or 3 topics that PGCD is looking at this year, again, a year, are presented to the curriculum committee. Those discussions are had, they're continuous with the mindset that at the end, a full presentation is going to be made to the full board with the recommendation in line with what the superintendent. So going back again to our role as curriculum, our role in curriculum is to listen to the recommendations of the administration and to see whether or not those recommendations are in line with the board goals and in line with the strategic plan of the school district and in line with the superintendent's goals. That's our role, right?
I agree with
So, oh, good, I'm glad you're agreeing that. So, and so when it comes to us at that point, that's the questions we then ask. So maybe that's the role of the curriculum committee, is not to have general topics discussed and they've taken on a lot, but maybe it is 2 or 3 items that also align with what our already in place system in Port Washington is, that really, we don't get PGCD reports, right? We don't get them because they go to the administration. They are recommendations to the administration. So maybe there's a way to incorporate those reports to the curriculum committee that could then ask the questions that are in line with our goals. And then the curriculum committee can come to the board and say, we heard, I keep using this example, we've heard about the math program that is being assessed. Here's what's being happening. Give a full report. Yeah, I don't know. I personally, I think we should eliminate curriculum. That's my personal opinion.
Gavin, Rachel, then I want to get back to narrowing this conversation.
So, I would not want to constrain the work that the district does with the curriculum to 3 topics in a curriculum committee structure if there was work in other areas that also needed to be done. And so I think the lines get blurred. So for example, the board heard about the math pilot by happenstance. It didn't come into committee. It wasn't brought into committee in any way, shape, or form, but it's obviously something that needs to happen. And so that to me is the chicken egg issue with, an example of the chicken egg issue within curriculum, is that I don't know if the math pilot necessarily aligns with our goals and mission and vision and strategic plan in the broader sense, but it certainly is a component of education that is important regardless of what our strategic plan is, right? We don't need a strategic plan in order to say our math program isn't working, we need to look at it and fix it. So, what I'm saying is there are topics that I think, and that's why I keep saying curriculum is organic, there are topics that need to be covered regardless, and to confine it to 3 topics that can come into committee, and then we're just not gonna discuss, curriculum's not gonna, Dr. Feeney is not going to try to take over, PGCD is not going to try to discuss other topics, because the board committee hasn't agreed to it, I think is detrimental to the students and to the district.
That's not what I suggest.
So is it detrimental?
Can Dr. Mine, can you pose that question if it is detrimental to him?
Sounds like it's proposed.
Yeah, she's done my.
I just, and also for the sake of time, I'm not saying this because that is across from me. I do have a parent meeting in a few minutes, that's a very important meeting. And I think we're overcomplicating this with an exponent of 50. I really do. I don't think we need to overthink this. And I appreciate everybody's perspectives. Here's my overall concern. And this is a conversation for another day, by the way. What is the board's role?
Yes.
When we talk about curricular matters? And I think I have a very different opinion than what some board members have, regardless of what Nisbet says. So, and again, I think that may muddy the water here, and this isn't the time or place. I think we need to extend this conversation. I would love to see, and I understand that where you're coming from, to limit it to 3 or 4, but that's where the deep work gets done. If we allow ourselves, and there's nothing wrong, I don't think, with beta testing something for 1 year to see if it actually works. But if the sole purpose of the curriculum committee, which I think should exist, is to possibly review what we currently have and take a deep dive to see if the return on that investment is actually working, just for a year, just to see what we have. And maybe we pick something at the elementary, middle, and high school level. And we really take that deep dive, and then we unpack what that looks like. And not just say electives at the high school, but maybe there are policies and maybe certainly budgetary implications as well. And this is maybe an interdisciplinary way of looking at how things exist in curriculum, just to try it. But I think it needs to exist. I think there's a real importance to it. The only thing I would add to it, and then I'll be quiet, is that we should have students, we should have teachers, and we should have others on that committee. I think
So how
that's
does that
what's missing.
marry with the PGCD
So,
structure?
and I was thinking of that now, because in my mind, because I think in images and visuals, there needs to be some flow chart as far as how things are connected. I don't know what the answer is now, but I wrote that down right in the middle when I was taking notes. I think there is the possibility of crossover. I think Sean's done a tremendous job with PGCD and making it work. I think there was a concern maybe years ago that maybe the function wasn't the way that we wanted it. I actually think it serves a really good purpose the way Sean is working with the teachers, which is great. And I do think there can be a connection with this committee. I think we need time to digest it.
Can you
So-
expand on what you think the board's role is in curriculum? Because I think it's important for us to have that piece of the
He said he wants to
conversation.
say that.
And he has a
later
parent
tonight.
meeting, so we can.
Yeah, and I know if I say that, then we have the weekend and then we're gonna do this. And I don't wanna do that, so.
I want to actually, if everyone's okay, I want to give our audience member an opportunity to give some feedback on behalf of the parent community, and then bring it back and try to, and then we're going to try to bring it back and narrow this into how we move forward from here, because I think it's starting to be clear what the path is. So Jessica, go.
Thank you. Oh, no.
We're gonna come back, we're gonna come back. I don't want to, okay. Go ahead.
Okay, well, thank you. I will start by saying that I'm not speaking on behalf of Parents Council, because obviously the Parents Council has not had a chance to convene and sort of discuss and reflect on what was discussed here. So I'm speaking as a community member who has attended every single board and subcommittee meeting this year. And, you know, I think for starters, I just want to say that I agree 1000% with Ms. Gilliard's comment towards the top of the meeting around accessibility, that evenings are not the only time that parents in our community can be at meetings and have the time to digest all of this, and throwing more into those meetings will inevitably make them longer. Especially, it seems like we're focused on curriculum, and there don't seem to be the same issues with the other two committees, because the format and purpose of curriculum is inconsistent right now with the other two subcommittees. So, you know, with that in mind, the full Board of Education meetings on Tuesday nights are not the only opportunity to have those broad presentations, especially when the board has no actionable stake in the outcome of that presentation. So from that perspective, that presentation is a community presentation in which, this may be controversial, a board member's perspective has no more or less value than any other community members. If a board member believes that something has come up that merits board attention, something with a true actionable outcome with respect to policy or program or whatever, that board member should raise that at a board meeting, which is not to say that curriculum should go away, because these subcommittee meetings, as Ms. Gilliard pointed out, are really the best opportunity for the community to engage and to actually, if they have something meaningful and important that the board should consider, to influence decision-making in real time. We do not really have that opportunity at board meetings right now. So where I sit as a community member, I truly value the curriculum committee. I think there continues to be a role for it. Anybody who has attended a curriculum meeting this year knows that they are the most well-attended subcommittee meetings, because that is the thing that hits home with parents and students the most. Maybe it's worth considering that there are other committee structures within the board's sort of scope, you know, citizens advisories committees that offer parents and students an opportunity to be more participatory and engaged. But a curriculum committee, perhaps that, well, complicated as this may be, follows a similar structure, purpose, and format as the other two committees. From a community perspective, from a clarity perspective, would be ideal. But again, if there's no actionable outcome for the board specifically, those meetings should be brought to the full community in a different way, not on every first Tuesday of the month. And there are venues for that as well, so that's just where I said.
So,
Ms. Gilliard has something.
yeah, that's what we're on. So, great. Did you want to, I'm trying to avoid responding directly to what you said and trying to.
I'm not.
Okay, all right, go ahead.
So
I understand.
first, in terms of the role of the board, I agree with Emily, your description of the role of the board. I would add one piece that I think is missing to that, which is that we're elected representatives of the public. And so when we sit in our committee meetings, all of them, we're also representing the public, right? Who elected us all because of what we thought about various things. That's a role that I think is important to note. The other thing is I'm hearing a lot, and I think I have heard a lot over the years, of trying to conform the curriculum committee to policy and budget. And it's just simply a fundamentally different role, right? It's different. We can have a debate. Around this table, we have probably a spectrum of what people think the board's role is in curriculum. Probably there are some people at the table who think we have no role. There are some people at the table who think we have a role. And what that role is open to discussion. But in any case, I think we can all agree that curriculum is certainly not the board's alone, right? Policy is ours alone. Budget, we have a large, but we still don't do a lot of the work, right? We have Mrs. Mandel,
98%
who's doing
The work, but it is ours alone.
Right.
So the oversight of it is ours alone. Right.
And the develop, I mean, yes, she does all the legwork, thank God for her. But we as the Board of Education, when it comes to budget, could say, no, we are adopting a $180 million budget, figure it out.
We could, but we would be foolish to do so,
I'm not
right?
saying we would, I'm not saying we would, I'm just saying, as far as the
So-
responsibility comes, it is our responsibility, and it's
So-
ours, and we get elected for, or lose elections based on that.
So, but when it comes to curriculum, right? The board alone, even if you believe that the board has a role in curriculum, as I do, and believes that the board has oversight of the district and that implies the education that we're offering in the district and that we should be representing the community in knowing what they want, in addition to looking at our mission, vision, and strategic plan, which also, by the way, the community signed off on. We are not doing the majority of the actual work. We are providing direction, we're providing community input, we're providing that overarching role. So I think limiting the curriculum committee to discussing 3 issues doesn't make sense to me, because the curriculum committee, I don't think any of us think, should be working a 40-hour work week to make curricular decisions, right? When it comes down to it, what should be happening is that our teachers, which is already happening, our teachers are having a lot of input in the form of PGCD, our administrators are working together all the time. I think the board having a role has value for understanding what direction the board thinks we should be going and what direction the community thinks we should be going. We've also already heard Dr. Feeney say that was informative for him this year. And so I wouldn't take away that. I would add. So I would still be willing to hear more about your committees, Julie, but I think, to me, the restructuring that needs to happen at curriculum is more updates and information coming in vis-a-vis PGCD and where various things are in the district, more of a natural workshopping kind of stuff. But also, I would still have these presentations and these deeper discussions, and I would be in favor of having more of them because, and then coming back and updating, right? Which I think the curriculum committee has been trying to do, right? Core extension is a great example. You're about to discuss it. I imagine then you'll come back at some point after and discuss again. I know last year we had agenda items we planned to come back to, and we came back to this year. So I think that we just have to not try to make things cookie cutter that are not naturally cookie cutter. These things are not the same, and we could be doing our job the best that we could be doing it, playing the role that we think we want to be playing, and have it look a little different in all of these committees. And it really already does. Policy and budget don't look the same either.
So bringing all of this to a close, what it sounds like I'm hearing, at least listening to everybody, policy and budget, we're gonna leave how it is. And curriculum, we're also going to leave how it is with the meaning that exists, the committee, but we have to do some work on what is exactly the role of the committee, how we topics, tying it in with the flow chart like you're talking about with what's going on in the district and PGCD. And then what I'm not sure of is how we're gonna bring all that back together and come to a resolution on what that looks like.
I think maybe we should be waiting for a recommendation from Dr. Keeney and Dr. Lumpkin.
Well, it is a board, the board can choose to do that, but this is our board committee. So it's
Agreed,
not-
agreed. I'm not saying that we have to accept their recommendation, but I think they have ideas that they want to kind of work through and come to us with a recommendation that we can accept or not accept.
Is that for you?
You free for that?
Find some time for your boss.
Okay, so is that conceptually, am I wrong with that generally the majority seems to want to keep, I know Emily, you want to get rid of everything.
I didn't say I wanted.
No, you said you want to get rid of the
everything.
committees.
I did not say that.
Curriculum.
I said curriculum.
Got it. So,
And I said it, by the way.
Yeah.
2 years ago. So
I know.
this isn't the first
no, I
time.
100% agree with you. But when we did the show of hands before, I saw that there was at least a majority to keep the
Sorry.
budget and personnel,
So it was way before.
right? So we're gonna do that. So
Can
we're
I,
okay?
can I add a
Yes.
suggestion that maybe we let Julie email all of us her alternate proposed structure, since we're not making any decisions that
I think we made a decision.
I think we're making a decision.
That's our
that we're gonna-
decision.
We're gonna
We're
keep
staying as
we're
is.
waiting to have more representation.
specifically for curriculum.
We're keeping everything the same, and then curriculum, we're getting an update, and we'll maybe change it if we like the
We
idea.
have to. Is
That's what
that,
I'm hearing.
is that,
I just hear that we came to this meeting with Dr. Hines basically saying
I want
he wanted to make a change in curriculum. And we're leaving saying,
we're gonna make a change, that we are.
no, we said we're keeping everything as is.
For
so-
budget and policy and personnel.
But we still haven't, we don't have agreement with
He's
what Dr.
He's
But
gonna bring us. a
We
proposal.
don't have a recommendation.
we kind of got one
Well,
already. And we were
yeah.
told, but we all don't agree with it. He said he'd like to have 2 to 3 topics
He
discussed.
said a lot of things.
No, he said way more than that.
Do you, Dr. Arndt, do you have a specific recommendation right
What
now?
did you, what did you say, Doctor?
Do you think you
That's waiting for me right now.
I think you should go, I don't think, I think
Let's
this
leave it the way it is right now, and then let's.
please extend our apologies to the parent.
So just to be clear,
I won't speak for everybody.
No,
the next, if we do meet again, you're gonna bring a specific
When
recommendation
will that be?
that we will. when-
So are we getting it in a packet, are we gonna get, like,
Let's-
what's
let's-
the
that's
action?
what- he's- You see, he's packed up, ready to leave.
No,
so
I'm
let's-
asking you to set the action.
Okay.
You're the board president.
Okay. You wanna send us something in a packet, and then we'll, if we think it's appropriate, we'll set a meeting to, if there's a lot of questions, we'll have to set up an in-person meeting. If not, we'll maybe follow up with the next,
Dr. Fee and I will try to have something in the next packet.
hopefully it won't take an hour, and we can wrap
I
it up.
recommend that it's not a packet. We've had this discussion and
No, listen, I
so
said,
we've
let
got-
us see it in the packet, and we will add this as a discussion item on our next evening meeting. to spend hopefully 10 minutes on it, and make a decision.
I mean, we just have to make this decision, but in time.
No, I just have a recommendation too, and then we can also clarify maybe the role of the board when it comes to curricular decisions. Is that okay too?
I agree with that.
That
Yes,
because some of that
perhaps we
would
can have
drive.
this as a June discussion item at our June meeting. We can't have it at the next meeting,
June's fine.
and May 16th is a problem, but I think maybe you should take it to June. The truth of the matter is, this is a discussion item amongst the board, and can be done at
No,
the
June's fine,
evening meeting.
June's fine, we'll skip that 10 meeting.
I shouldn't have any conversations at tenure. Celebration.
Okay, let's do, motion to adjourn. Who's gonna make the motion? I'm sorry, Julie.
Oh,
who's gonna make it? Yes, all
Julie.
right, Julie,
I
Deb's a
can
second,
Okay.
Deb's a second, all in favor, 7. We're adjourned.
All right. Great evening,
Thank you.
everybody.
Thank you very much.
Rachel.